Is there anything you would have done differently?
We reported a true story.
Our colleague Brian Williams is back in Kuwait City tonight after a close call in the skies over Iraq.
Controversial Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh and questions about Kavanaugh's drinking in the past.
Sean Hannity, come on up, Sean Hannity.
Today, Andrew Cuomo is having a moment.
Hi, I am Chris Direwolf.
I'm Eliana Johnson.
Welcome to Ink-Stained Wretches, where we break down what's going wrong and what's going right with the American news media. Eliana Johnson, it's a little chilly in here today for you. You had to go full sweatshirt last week. And where you at now? What's your?
Oh yeah, I forgot about that.
What's your thermocline?
I need the sweatshirt on top of the sweater.
Well, you're drinking iced coffee, so that's not doing any good for you.
It makes no difference.
Makes no difference.
No.
You're that cold that it just won't matter.
Correct.
Well, I want to just say on behalf of all the fat dudes in America, we're here for the indoor over air conditioned summer. We're ready for it. We're prepared.
All right. We're also prepared for the front page.
Let's do it.
Up first, we have Elise Stefanik. We should listen to the clip. She was asked about her. She's been talked about as a potential vice presidential nominee for
she has
Donald Trump.
Worked harder than anyone.
And she was asked about statements she made before 2016, in 2014, 15. And the New York Times had done a big piece in 2023. So she did an interview on Fox News Sunday. Shannon Bream brought them up. Let's listen to the clip.
I want to talk to you about the veepstakes. Your name is continually thrown out as being on the short list potentially, that this trip may be part of an audition. The New York Times had a lengthy piece where they talk about your transformation, they say, from somebody who was not supportive of President Trump to somebody who is full-throatedly supportive of him. They say you called him a whack job at one point, and they add this. In August 2015, she told a New York radio station that he was insulting to women and that his candidacy would hurt the party's efforts to attract female voters. According to her former friends, they continue, she thought Mr. Trump was too awful and ridiculous to be taken seriously. Her revisionism still shocks those who have known her the longest and who remember the disdain she expressed for Mr. Trump back then. So the question is when, more importantly, why did you change your mind about President Trump?
Well, Shannon, it's a disgrace that you would quote the New York Times with nameless, faceless,
but they're quoting your
sources.
Friends, so I'm giving you a chance to respond to
Shannon,
that.
Shannon, they're not quoting my friends. Those names are not included because they are false smears. I was attacked.
To be fair, there are a number of names of people. Just to be fair, there are a number of names of people who are quoted in the article.
Shannon, let me
people
correct
can read it for themselves.
I have a couple of thoughts. Do you want to go first?
No, lay it on me.
You know, most of the vice presidential contenders are going to be faced with questions about past criticisms of Donald Trump, starting with Nikki Haley, people who ran against him in the primary, Ron DeSantis, Marco Rubio, J.D. Vance, Elise Stefanik. This is sort of it's a predictable form of question that will arise. And I actually thought J.D. Vance, this has been put to him too, and he answered it quite well, where he said, I did think and say those things, and I was persuaded that he was the best candidate, but he was quite calm and measured in explaining his change of mind. And given that the question is sort of a predictable one that will come up for all these people, I think you have to have an answer ready that says, why did you come around to the guy?
I think for Stefanik, she has embraced what we might call the original DeSantis strategy with the press, which is, so Shannon Bream.
It's just tough to do with Fox News, I think.
Well, yeah, I think it didn't work for DeSantis. I think we can say conclusively it did not work for DeSantis in running for president, attacking the media, and then we know the coda to DeSantis's campaign where he's out on the trail. I think he was in Iowa complaining about the unfairness of the coverage. Like, well, I don't know if you get to have it both ways. I think for running for vice president, what Stefanik is doing is trying to show Donald Trump and the people around him that she will say anything. She will only fight, right? That the idea is, if you pick me as your running mate, I will say anything, and I will fight anybody. I will do whatever it takes. And that is the level of commitment that she's trying to show to Trump and to her problem is that the people around Donald Trump don't trust her. And I assume Trump doesn't trust her, and they don't believe. So with J.D. Vance, as you say, I don't know that they trust him, but he took ownership of his, as you say, took ownership of, yes, I did. And then the sin that we are most apt to forgive in our friends is flattery. And basically J.D. Vance's answer is, but he was so wonderful, I couldn't help myself. I used to think that way, and then he brought me around.
And can I just say, I think for a lot of Republicans, there's a grain of truth in that. There are people who vehemently opposed him, and then he did, actually, and who still are critical of him, both in the commentariat and in the journalists, and among lawmakers who could say, like, I was implacably opposed to him in the primary. As president, like, I was kind of impressed with some things he did. There is like some, you can say that in a way that is
right,
truthful.
But she's trying, this is a performance that is trying to show no matter what, under every circumstance, I will deny, fight, do whatever. And the other question, of course, that they all have to be prepared for, which we talked before about Tim Scott failing that test, which is, did Donald Trump lose the 2020 election? And will you accept the results? And so this question about why did you say bad things about him before and now you are sucking up to him? And did he win the election? Did he lose the election? And will you accept the results this time? You can guarantee if you want to get mainstream media exposure, if that's what you want, then you're going to have to be, you have to, as you say, you have to have an answer.
We did not, we recorded last Thursday.
Yes.
Then Friday, the New York Times ran the story about Justice Alito. Well, I should say, the headline is, at Justice Alito's house, a Stop the Steal symbol on display.
The flag
An upside-down flag adopted by Trump supporters contesting the Biden victory flew over the justice's front lawn as the Supreme Court was considering an election case.
And Homie threw his wife under the bus instantaneously.
And Alito said, I had no involvement whatsoever in the flying of the flag. It was briefly placed by Mrs. Alito in response to a neighbor's use of objectionable and personally insulting language on yard signs. Now,
where do they live?
They live in Virginia.
Okay.
Now, Shannon Bream also had the follow-up interview with Alito where he talked about, he got into what was this dispute with the neighbors. And apparently, and the Times says, interviews show that the justice's wife, Martha Ann Alito, had been in a dispute with another family on the block over an anti-Trump sign on their lawn. Now, in the interview with Bream, Justice Alito said the sign said F Trump and was, 30 feet or 20 feet or something from a kid's bus stop. And she objected to that. And then the Times continues, but given the timing and the starkness of the symbol, neighbors interpreted the inverted flag as a political statement. Now, apparently when Mrs. Alito, this is now back to Bream, when Mrs. Alito went and asked the couple to remove this sign because it was near the kid's school bus, the man in the house called her a C word.
Whoa.
And so this escalated.
Things are getting rough out in Falls Church, baby.
I have to say, I have had the privilege of meeting Justice Alito and Mrs. Alito, and what I took away from that was she is definitely the hot-blooded one. He wants to be with his books and is quiet and bookish. She is a force of nature. So this all seemed quite believable to me, I must say. My beef with this story is the Times has no indication that this wasn't his wife's, that this wasn't about his wife. And the thrust of the story then is that his wife's views are a reflection of him. And yet these are the same people who say women and women's liberation and feminism, and I take issue with that. I totally take issue with that.
I mean, yeah, there is that part, but there's also the part that if I'm trying to think what's on the other side, is Ketanji Brown Jackson, is she married?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, she definitely is
Yeah.
married. So if Ketanji Brown Jackson's husband put a sign in their yard that said "Free Palestine from the river to the sea," I would say bad. I would say bad luck. The Mrs. Alito or Mr. Jackson are as part of that family invested in the maintenance of the appearance of judicial impartiality and propriety.
I agree with that too, and think it was not good judgment.
Right.
But the implication of the piece is that it compromises him in some way, which I think is BS. But I agree, it was bad judgment on her part because she bears some responsibility for, she should have not have done that.
Well, the New York Times was not done with the flag beat. They were not done with the flag beat.
But also, she's allowed to do stupid things and make bad decisions. She is.
I mean, people are allowed to do a lot of stuff. Whether it can versus should is well, tell them about the other flag.
Okay, so the Times has a follow-up. And by the way, can we note this is a whole beat for the mainstream media, which said John Roberts' wife is a legal recruiter, and that causes ethical issues because she does really well in that job, and it's because she gets business because he's a Supreme Court justice, and that raises important issues. And you know what? Clarence Thomas's wife, she does this and that means he believes this. And you know what? I talked about this on PBS on Friday, and I said, if my husband, if what I ran my mouth about somehow reflected back on my husband, he would faint. He would faint.
I certainly take your point, but you have to tell them about the other flag.
Okay. Another provocative flag was flown at another Alito home. The Justice's beach house displayed a, quote, appeal to heaven flag, a symbol carried on January 6th and associated with a push for a more Christian-minded government. Oh.
Well.
Okay.
Well.
So, I am actually not familiar with this flag at all. Last summer, 2 years after an upside-down American flag was flown outside the Virginia home of Justice Samuel A. Alito Jr., another provocative symbol was displayed at his vacation house in New Jersey. This time it was the Appeal to Heaven flag, which, like the inverted U.S. flag, was carried by rioters at the Capitol on January 6th. Also known as the Pine Tree flag, it dates back to the Revolutionary War, but largely fell into obscurity until recent years and is now a symbol of support for former President Donald J. Trump, for a religious strand of the Stop the Steal campaign, and for a push to remake American government in Christian terms. I must say, having followed the news pretty closely, I would have no idea.
So
you?
So yeah, for the, we'll call him like the Mike Flynn Christian nationalist and Christian nationalist adjacent group, this is a symbol that they have adopted. And the problem, of course, with symbols, this is like what does the Gadsden flag, the Don't Tread on Me flag, mean? Is originally the symbol of the snake was a join or die. It was published in Ben Franklin's Pennsylvania Gazette to urge people for the colonies to unite against a common threat, and it was a call to unity. It evolved over time to become a symbol, the snake that strikes back in the Revolution, and then evolved until it now became, now it is much more associated. Then it was the Tea Party movement, and now it's, I don't know what it is now. But the semiotics of these things is complicated and challenging. But I would definitely say that the Appeal to Heaven flag is not a simple one to fly, right? And if your husband is a Supreme Court justice, probably not the right choice. It's not exactly flying the stars and bars, right? You're not saying that, but you're saying something. And again, I don't think that. Well, first, I would stipulate the point: the New York Times Alito flag beat is something else, right? They're definitely on the case, and I think it's not unreasonable for one to conclude that Mrs. Alito is a wild one, right? That she is a person of very strong opinions and not of a left-leaning kind. I think that's very reasonable to conclude. I think it's also reasonable to conclude from Samuel Alito's public utterances and writings that if he is not completely aligned with her, he is not just conservative. He is of a he and Justice Clarence Thomas are of a bent that is not a libertarian kind of conservatism, right? I don't think it's the old Scalia version. All of that is interesting and true. The focus on it, the reason I flag this, no pun intended. Okay, pun intended, I confess. The reason I flag this is the coverage suggests, and the way that it is met in Congress and the way that it is met in the commentariat is, what will we do? Can we remove Samuel Alito? What steps will be taken to rein in this out-of-control justice in the Supreme Court and keep him off these cases? And it all suggests that there is a vehicle. There is not a vehicle, right? We have to live with the reality that the Supreme Court, the justices of the Supreme Court, are appointed for life for a reason. That is to be beyond the reach of these kinds of pressures. And it is what it is. That's exactly how it is. And they're not going to, there's nothing that somebody else is going to do to make Samuel Alito get off of the inevitable election cases that are coming this year. There's nothing that anybody's going to do. Samuel Alito gets to it, and that's just the reality. And a lot of this coverage creates the false impression that there is some vehicle, right? Dick Durbin is not going to pass legislation through Congress that gets signed into law that gives the Congress of the United States oversight over recusals on the Supreme Court or changes the rules on recusals. So that is a false narrative that these stories push.
Tacitly.
Yeah. And they push them tacitly, and then it gets picked up by the critics of the court that say this. All of that is true. And I will also just say, if you're a justice on the Supreme Court, or you are married to, or the family of a justice on the Supreme Court, chill out. You have to chill out. We need the court to keep its credibility and respectability. And if you are mad at your neighbor, or you feel a strong Christian nationalist vibe, or you want to do anything, there are implications that come in your life from being a justice on the Supreme Court or being the spouse or family member of one of these people. Have you ever read the letter George H.W. Bush sent his sons?
Yes,
when he was running? He said there will be things that are unfair, and there will be opportunities that you're going to have to pass up. And it's all like, I acknowledge it's all true because of my choice and what I'm doing. And I'm sorry you have to do it, but I ask you to sort of bear it cheerfully. And to keep a republic, we need people to cheerfully bear the obligations that come with their responsibilities.
All right, moving on to, we just have one article in our war section this week.
A very good one.
Yes, a very good one. And it is in The Atlantic by Graham Wood about the UN's revision of civilian casualty statistics that coming out of Gaza. This happened about 10 days ago, where the UN quietly revised and dropped by about half the number of civilians who have died in Gaza, and it went pretty much unremarked about by the mainstream media, which has been citing these numbers. And so he digs into, how did this happen? And he notes that the UN went from relying, without explanation, went from relying on one Gaza ministry to another Gaza ministry. And they have no good explanation for why that is. And he says, this is one of those moments when the fog of statistics could be dispersed with just a few sentences of straight talk of the sort rarely uttered by spokespeople. The UN numbers changed because the UN has little idea how many children have been killed in Gaza beyond a lot. It gets its statistics from Hamas. Where else would it get them from? There are no independent epidemiologists in Gaza right now doing the survey work, house to bombed out house, that would yield reliable numbers. So the UN organization used unreliable ones. It never concealed its sources, but it distributed even the most questionable numbers under the UN name. And then in turn, every US media outlet took those numbers and ran with them. And by the way, they're relying on either the UN sources or the same unreliable Hamas sources. So he ends saying, we have no idea how many civilians have died in Gaza. And the final sentence in this article is, the correct answer is, well, a lot. It would be nice if, before the war is over, some trusted third party could verify this macabre estimate with greater precision. But to pretend that we have any idea is foolish.
Yeah, the 35,000 number that was thrown around and treated as fact, and a appalling lack of circumspection about these numbers and about what the fog of war means. And sort of relatedly, when the International Criminal Court handed down indictments against Netanyahu and what's his name from Hamas, trying to both sides its way into the story, there was a lot of coverage that said, well, this could be big. And I thought, well, this protects Bibi Netanyahu indefinitely, right? This is his political get out of jail free card. And the inability to think through these issues as it relates to this, and it would be true in any conflict, but particularly in this one, where you have the whole world watching and such strong feelings and all of that stuff. Good on the Atlantic for taking a deeper look.
In other news, the Washington Post editorial board, which it's interesting. The Post editorial board is increasingly appears to be more conservative than the reporters at the paper.
For sure. That's a low bar. That's a low bar.
It is a low bar, but it's trending Wall Street Journal. Mm-hmm. Not in terms of how conservative it is, but in terms of the divide between the editorial board and the paper. So they write an editorial, the problem with diversity statements and what to do about them. It is to my left in that they, they're all for DEI and everything, but they don't think diversity statements serve that purpose.
But this came from this isn't a column from a conservative columnist. This is
their editorial board's view. So they write, because the criteria for acceptable DEI statements are often vague, job seekers must do the work of anticipating the ideological and political preferences of university administrators and faculty who are disproportionately left-leaning. The MIT Communication Lab, for instance, explained that a diversity statement is an opportunity to show that you care about the inclusion of many forms of identity in academia and in your field, including but not limited to gender, race, ethnicity, age, nationality, sexual orientation, religion, and ability status, and notes it, quote, it may be appropriate to acknowledge aspects of your own marginalized identity and or your own privilege. Harvard's Bach Center for Teaching and Learning included a list of guiding questions, including, do you seek to identify and mitigate how inequitable and colonial social systems are reinforced in the academy by attending to and adjusting the power dynamics in your courses? Oh my God. One thing that they don't mention in here is that in many cases in academia, the applications were screened by diversity statements before they even got to credentials for the job, which is absurd. But it is an interesting inflection point, I think.
And probably will lead to backlash. You know, the question about what happens with the Post editorial board on certain matters, particularly national security. The Washington Post has consistently been to the right of the voice underneath a lot of its reportage. That's for sure. But when I saw this and the Post coming out against, a sacred cow and saying anything about this. I wonder at what point do we get at the Washington Post what we've seen at the New York Times. The Journal doesn't have the same problem because the Journal's editorial page has always been conservative, right? That's never been that from the beginning as a business newspaper. It's always had a right of center view. It's changed at certain points, but that's always been part of the story. As the Post editorial page looks for staking out this ground, they have a staff that is, tends to be pretty wild. So I'm going to be interested to see how this stuff plays going forward.
It will be very interesting. Vanity Fair did a piece, and this is sort of in our follow-up files. Meet the Inspector General of the New York Times Newsroom, and it is about an attorney, Charlotte Barrett. And when the Times has to conduct internal investigations, which is kind of a funny thing for a newsroom, but she's the woman who does it. So when Joe Kahn, the executive editor, wanted to crack down on leaks surrounding the recent podcast on the rapes of women in Gaza, he dispatched her to interview people. So they write, most recently, Barrett played a significant role in a leak investigation that the Times opened following a report in The Intercept about a yet-to-be-aired episode of The Daily. Recent reports about the leak investigation have brought increased awareness of Barrett and her investigatory style. She interviewed dozens of staffers in an attempt to understand how internal details about the podcast's editorial process got out. Meetings that the New York Times Guild said were rife with, quote, harassment and intimidation. Barrett questioned employees about their involvement in the Times' Middle Eastern and North African Employee Resource Group and asked them to hand over the names of the group's active members, prompting the Times Guild to blow the whistle on what they said was racial targeting. Oh my gosh. 2 former Times journalists subjected to Barrett's investigations who spoke to Vanity Fair had similar experiences. One I spoke to said Barrett was, quote, bullying and threatening during the course of a probe they considered to be, quote, based on rumor and innuendo, blah, blah. Now, what I do credit this piece with doing is they essentially say she's doing what management asks her to do.
Right.
And she is like the hatchet woman for management. She's the bad guy. And every investigation she carries out, she brings them the facts and they decide what to do.
Right.
And so
she's like a special prosecutor.
She is. And so sure, I guess it's accurate reporting about what she does, but it is only a reflection of what Times leadership is asking for and how they are running the place.
And I certainly get why reporters would not like the idea of having basically internal affairs.
Well, grow up.
Well, I certainly get it. I understand why that would the menace of that would be chilling to these folks. But at the same time, the extraordinary exposure that the Times is subject to on the mistakes of reporters. I'm old enough to remember Jason Blair, right? And I'm old enough to remember when 20 years ago, 15, 20 years ago, that it was a very open question about whether the Times credibility would survive. And they've got somebody referred to her as the Hammer. And I thought, she probably likes that. She probably digs what if this piece was designed. I don't think I call it a hit piece, but if this was designed to talk about the anxieties that reporters have, if I was Charlotte Barrett, I would say, I'm doing my job well. I'm succeeding. If they call me the Hammer and they're scared when I'm in a meeting, then I'm doing my job. And they are afraid to screw up because they know that I will find them.
Touché. All right. That brings us to...
Oh, yeah. Speaking of the Post.
Bad news came for Post journalists from the new Washington Post CEO who came from News Corp, right?
I think that's right.
Will Lewis.
Yep.
He announced in a staff meeting yesterday that the paper lost $77 million over the past year. And even more interestingly to me, saw a 50% drop-off in audience since 2020. and said, to be direct, we are in a hole and we have been for some time. And look, I don't know how to say this nicely, but their product sucks.
Oh.
The paper is not good. And I guess during the Trump years, like the extreme libs were reading it all the time.
They optimized for range.
Yeah.
For rage revenue.
But it's just not a great paper anymore.
I try to temper my scorn for the Washington Post, which I have frequently referred to as America's worst big city newspaper. And that's in large part for its failure to cover the local news. But what the Post basically did was it was getting shellacked by the New York Times on digital subscriptions during the Trump era. And so they went bonkers, right? They went all in on the kind of rage revenue that is so corrosive. And they outdid the Times on how much of an anti-Trump publication it was. And it was Joy Reid to the New York Times Morning Joe, right? It was like they went for it. And then after everybody was burned out on that and the Trump presidency was over, the revenue plummeted. And they have to find a way back. And I wish Will Lewis the best. But as you say, one of the things that has to change, there's a lot of things that have to change, but it has to be a better newspaper. The product just has to be better.
That's not far off from what I said.
No.
And meanwhile, the editorial page is getting more interesting and
provocative.
Provocative, I was going to say. And it's interesting because it's unpredictable.
Right.
And the paper is bad because
it's predictable.
Right. It falls into the same tropes and tomes, and I'm going to get to that in my obsession. And it's unserious.
The part of this that interests me from a business perspective.
I agree. This is very interesting.
Part of it that appeals to me from a business perspective, and this is reporting from CNN, among the new revenue streams are flexible payments, and this is what Lewis announced in his bid to get the paper back at least out of the deep red. Among the revenue streams are flexible payments, which were described to staffers as frictionless payments, which would target a likely untapped audience. In other words, a person who may be interested in reading a single story on the Post website will soon be able to make that one-time purchase via a service like Apple Pay. I'm told, this is the CNN reporter, I'm told that the feature will in fact start to roll out next quarter. Now, this is something I, for years, have said is the key.
Yes.
Right? The key for the survival of the development and survival of a healthy news business is an iTunes-like system in which people can purchase individual stories and not the trap.
In a frictionless way without your username and password and I'm a subscriber, I can't freaking get behind.
Right. And local papers like the Baltimore Sun, I see you, Baltimore Sun, I'm over you. If you keep sending me emails, I don't know what I'm going to do. But when you say, yes, I'd like to subscribe, and then they say, okay, now in 6 months it's going to go up to $1 billion a month. You're like, well, okay, I'm gonna unsubscribe when it goes to the $1 billion a month for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, and they're like, nice try, unsubscribing from our newspaper. We'll chase you to the end of the earth. That model is unworkable. But, and this is the big question for the Post, how frictionless is frictionless? Do I need to have a Washington Post account? And I do, but let's say it was a paper I was not a subscriber to. What it really takes is that you can go click a button and it's through PayPal or it's through a widely used service, that it really is a one click, right? I just want to do this and I just want one click. That's what they need. So the level of friction, what frictionless really means will matter a great deal here. But I really, really hope they succeed with this, because a functional way for individual publications, not through Apple News, not through some other source, to monetize their own work is really important.
Up next, the Wall Street Journal and OpenAI have struck a content deal valued at over $250 million. Sorry, it's actually News Corp.
Yep,
so
all of them.
Wall Street Journal owner News Corp. And so the Journal reports Wall Street Journal owner News Corp, a major content licensing, struck a major content licensing pact with the generative artificial intelligence company OpenAI, aiming to cash in on a technology that promises to have a profound impact on the news publishing industry. The deal could be worth more than $250 million over 5 years, including compensation in the form of cash and credit cards for use of OpenAI technology. According to people familiar with the situation, OpenAI would use content from News Corp's consumer-facing news publications, including archives, to answer users' queries and to train its technology.
Will Scarlett Johansson now will fake Scarlett Johansson now read you the Wall Street Journal? This is a move by News Corp to get ahead of and get in on there's a lot of legal struggle now and to come over publications trying to protect their content from AI, from large language model AI, which is rapaciously hungry for that content, right? That's what it needs. And nothing is better than periodicals for training large language models, getting that information in. So what most publications are doing is suing to protect their intellectual property and keep it from going in. What the Murdochs are doing here is they're saying, we're going to go in. We're going to get there first, and we're going to come up with a deal to get some money. Now, I'm highly dubious about how do they say it? Could be worth more than $250 million. Well, a lot of things could be worth more than $250 million. My coffee cup could be worth more than $250 million, depending on how things play out in the coffee cup market. But I think the idea here that they're going to strike a deal that will get them revenue out of this is maybe the better approach than fighting it. I don't know about OpenAI. I think OpenAI is kind of janky. And this could end up being what was the News Corp social media site? Was that MySpace? They bought it. Yeah. So OpenAI could end up being another MySpace situation where they bet on the wrong horse. But because I think Google and other generative AI are going to probably blow past whatever the goofus is at is OpenAI is ChatGPT, right? Yes. So I think what Google's doing and others are doing will probably go past. But this is a play, and it may be the smartest one.
And it's in contrast to what the New York Times is doing, which
right.
they're in a lawsuit
right.
suing to prevent their content from going in.
Right.
All right. Chris, we had a debate, a mini debate, a couple of weeks ago talking about whether the new owner of The Onion, who is this disinformation researcher, disinformation reporter.
And I was not familiar with his work, Ben Collins.
Ben Collins.
Yep.
I'm just going to say, spoiler alert, I think I won this debate saying this guy's going to ruin it. The headline is misleading. It's misleading. The new CEO of The Onion is bringing back the good internet. Here's how. Well, it's not exactly The Onion you may remember. Fast Company reports, The Onion is in many ways made for today's incessant news moment. It has been covering the devastation in Gaza in an incredibly brave way. Collins says, it has also covered the heavy-handed crackdown on domestic protests, an upcoming election with scant public enthusiasm, the looming threat of authoritarianism, and more. So, not The Onion of yore.
So looking at The Onion right now, the Onion's always had a left sensibility. I think that is relatively fair to say, but it also took shots. It sort of like its imitator, the Babylon Bee, which the idea is it has a point of view generally, but then occasionally roasts its own side, and that's all I'm looking for from The Onion is that it spreads it around a little bit and doesn't become one note. and that it doesn't become partisan. It's the difference between being opinionated and being partisan. And I'm looking at the Onion today, and it's not a total catastrophe. It is definitely left of center, and a lot of it is crummy. But so far, breaking news, Columbia University gives students option to finish classes from prison.
That's good. It's like good, but not.
Yeah,
I mean,
I'll say it has not failed totally yet. I'm still holding out hope.
Okay.
That they can.
We'll keep you posted, everyone.
Yeah, they can find a way to dunk on their own side.
Okay, and this is also an update. Sports Illustrated fails to deliver May issue after breakup with publisher. Sources. This is a New York Post report. This is your area, Chris. I don't care about.
This is just a follow-up file. We talked about it before about the fight over Sports Illustrated, and the Arena Group, which had its license revoked in January after failing to make a quarterly payment to rights holder Authentic Brands, will not turn over as of this recording, will not turn over the subscriber list to the new publisher. So the magazine just didn't go out for the first time. It just didn't go out. And this is a story about how these fights over intellectual property and all of that stuff. I mean, Sports Illustrated could just stop, right? It could just cease to exist. And it's a cautionary tale. That's all.
Chris, that brings us to our Facile files.
Do it.
Up first, we have Queer Planet trailer. Andrew
Rannells
narrates LGBTQ plus nature doc. The upcoming film is narrated by Girls 5 Ever actor Andrew Rannells and is billed as a, quote, first of its kind nature documentary.
First of its kind.
Focuses solely on the queer creatures in the animal kingdom. We've all heard of gay penguins, but this film really opened my eyes to the full spectrum of LGBTQ plus behaviors across the natural world, Rannells said in a press statement.
Those gay penguins have gotten more...
And what could be more natural than being who you are? I'm excited to be a part of Queer Planet, especially during Pride Month and on Peacock, surely the most colorful and glamorous of all the streaming services.
The gay penguins have really gotten a lot. We've seen a lot for decades now. The gay penguins have really, and now this is their star turn. This is their star turn, and congratulations to the gay penguins for having their Pride Month will be their time to shine on Peacock. Congratulations.
Up next.
Oh, baby.
Column. News business needs help in California. Is government the answer?
What? This is by a column by George Skelton, the Capital Journal columnist for the Los Angeles Times up in Sacramento. And newspapers are dying, he writes. That's old news. What's new is that in California, they may get some state government life support. There's state legislation brewing that would force the largest internet platforms, like Google, to kick in money to help save journalism. Oh, that's nice. These platforms are the principal villains, after all, in the downfall of so many news outlets. It's not only newspapers that are in perilous decline. It's much of news reporting for print, broadcast, and even in digital. Even in digital, it's also happening. I don't know what to say about this. Was flagged by an alert wretch out there, but I gotta say, this is the kind of that you're writing about yourself, right, George Skelton? You're writing about yourself. You're covering the Capitol, and you're like, interesting idea to give me money. There's a fascinating idea that's coming out here that would give me money, and we're looking into it. This could be good. Aside from the reality that there are First Amendment considerations, strong First Amendment considerations about having the government fund and thereby not fund some publications. That's the stop. That's a do not go past that. But even beyond that, it won't work. It will not work. The government cannot subsidize the news business into health. The news business has to figure out how to do that with all the things that we're talking about today, about What are you going to do about AI? What are you going to do about frictionless payments? What are you going to do about this? What are you going to, all of those, and as we were talking about with the Post, make your coverage better. The news industry has to save itself. If the government tries to save the news industry, they will kill it. They will surely kill it. So, woof.
Chris, I love this. This is our style, a little bit of our style section before we get to our obsessions. Chris Wallace's interview with Larry David aired on, I think it's on their streaming platform. But anyhow, this clip was posted on the New York Post where Chris Wallace asks Larry David what his net worth is, and the response is perfect.
I actually looked. The over-under is $500 million. No, we're not doing a spit take here.
By the way, I'm out of water. Okay?
Chris, that brings us to our obsessions of the week. Where we break down the stories we can't get out of our heads. And Chris, I think this may have gone up last Thursday at 3:15, so after we recorded. And we actually editorialized on this at the Beacon. It is a Washington Post piece that I took great issue with, but also follows a pattern of, I would say, ignominious reporting at the Washington Post. The headline is, Business Titans Privately Urged NYC Mayor to Use Police on Columbia Protesters, Chats Show. And I will read a little bit from it. It says it is about a 100+ person WhatsApp group that includes some wealthy business people and New York City Mayor Eric Adams, and they are saying, "Call in the cops, clear out the protesters." They also did a Zoom with Mayor Adams, a subsection of these people, and another subsection leaked the chats to the Washington Post. So you can see how exclusive a group this was. So the Post writes, the messages offer a window into how some prominent individuals have wielded their money and power in an effort to shape American views of the Gaza war, as well as the actions of academic, business, and political leaders, including New York City's mayor. 4 days after chat members held the video call with Adams, student protesters occupied a campus building, and Columbia's president invited police back to campus to clear the building. Officers removed and arrested dozens of protesters, pushing, striking, and dragging students in the process. The Post reported, one officer accidentally fired his gun. Months before the protests at Columbia this spring, some chat members attended private briefings with former Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett, Benny Gantz, a member of the Israeli War Cabinet, and Israel's ambassador to the United States, Michael Herzog, according to chat records. Every member of the chat group that's named is a prominent, wealthy Jewish person, and the suggestion in the piece is that they were behind the decision to call in the police, though, as is clear, the actual reason the cops were called in was that the protesters broke into this building and the Columbia president made the decision to call in the cops. And what was striking about this to me is it says, the messages offer a window into how some prominent individuals have wielded their money and power. But the piece itself actually shows no ways in which they've exerted influence. It has no there as what did they buy? How did they exercise influence? Another example it gives is that Bill Ackman aired a screening of Israeli officials have aired a 40-minute video of the Hamas footage of the October 7th atrocities. And it says he paid to air this at Harvard for Harvard students and promoted it and attended the screening. And that's somehow linked back to this, which he was very public about. And in fact, all of the named members of this, they say this provides a window into what's really happening behind the scenes. All of the members of this, Dan Loeb, Bill Ackman, and there are several others, have been quite public about their views, and it suggests there's something untoward about them trying to influence public opinion, which they're doing out in the open, and there's nothing that happened behind the scenes that is different from what happened out in the open. It just suggests there's something bad about it, and plays into I think some really noxious anti-Semitic tropes. The ADL came out and condemned the piece. Two of the members of the chat group came out, Dan Loeb came out and said, thank you for exposing us doing our civic duty, which is advocating for what we believe in. And then another one, Dan Lebetsky, he's the founder of Kind, also condemned the piece. And what's amazing to me is the Post did another piece that was in this vein, that was about the Stop Anti-Semitism Twitter account, where they said, these people criticized Israel, and now their lives were upended, and Stop Anti-Semitism. The characterization of what was called out on that Twitter account, which re-aired what these people had done publicly, was not criticism of Israel. It was tearing down hostage posters and making grotesque anti-Semitic comments, was things these people had done in public. And it's amazing to me. I wonder, how long can the Post go without commenting publicly on accusations that are coming from prominent people, outside groups devoted to combating these kinds of tropes, but they will not go on the record publicly defending this piece. They have not gone on the record publicly defending it. They're just keeping their heads down. And when I think of why is the Post struggling, I think of pieces like this.
Was Eric Adams in this chat group?
He's in the chat group.
Oh, okay.
And he did a Zoom with some of these people. Again, it doesn't show what happened because of it. You know, Eric Adams talks to lots of people, and these are his constituents.
And rich ones.
And donors to his campaign. That happens a lot.
Yeah. Huh. All right. Okay. You will be unsurprised to hear that my obsession is about a poll. And you will be unsurprised to hear that my obsession is about the siloing of media. Pew Research numbers. More Americans want the journalists they get their news from, fix your headline. More Americans want the journalists they get their news from to share their politics than any other personal trait. And here's what Pew writes. About 4 in 10 Americans say it is at least somewhat important that they get their news from journalists who share their political views, 39%. That is nearly double the share who say the same about getting news from journalists who share their religious views or talk or sound like them, 22 and 20%. Younger adults are more likely than older Americans to say they want news from journalists who are around the same age as them. Among U.S. adults ages 18 to 29, 23% say this is at least somewhat important compared to blah, blah. Who cares? Young people. Sorry, young people. The poll here is significant to me for this subset. Liberal Democrats, conservative Republicans, most likely to want the news from journalists who share their politics. So it's 40% of Republicans, 47% of self-identified conservatives, 29% of people who are moderate to liberal, 41% among Democrat, lean Democrat, 33% among conservative to moderate, and 50% among self-described liberals. So what you see is that people who are closer to the middle, and none of this should be surprising, but it quantifies the problem. So roughly the same share of moderate to liberal and moderate to conservative people say that it's important to them that they're getting news from people who share their point of view. But 47%, so roughly the same share of conservatives and liberals, self-described conservatives and liberals, say that that's half of them are saying that that's important to them. This is bad. It's bad. What I want is that I would get my news from someone who I didn't know what their ideological or partisan bias was. If I could tell you what my dream news source is the news source where I say, I don't really know how this person votes. I don't really know what they think. the ideal journalist to me. Now, there's opinion journalism, which is different and all of that stuff. But when it comes to straight news reporting, what do I want? I want to say, I have no idea how this person votes. I have no idea what this person thinks. That would be ideal. But you see here in that half of conservatives and half of liberals say that it's important to them that the journalists share their politics. Some of it is understandable because if you think that the media is biased against you, that you're looking for, and this is what very progressive people think, and this is what conservative people think, is that the corporate media or the mainstream media is biased against you, and you're looking for somebody who will tell you the truth. But I got to tell you, this poll, it counts as my obsession because it puts in very stark terms how important something that is bad has become. And this is a great sort of data visualization of the siloing of our media and why so many news outlets have moved in that direction.
Chris, that brings us to my favorite time of the week, which is reader mail. And we have a note from Alex Stewart in Chicago. And Alex writes, "Hi, Chris and Eliana. When the original stories about the increase in U.S. pregnancy mortality rates versus other developed countries came out, I got into an argument on a Nebraska football message board, naturally, that the comparisons were unfair because, as you pointed out, the counting methodology had changed in the U.S. but not abroad. After listening to this week's pod, I returned to the board to gloat about how this was finally getting corrected. I fired up a Google search and was surprised to learn that major outlets, including NPR, all had stories about the data problems in March. However, they still interpreted the new study, which they helpfully linked, incorrectly and framed it as saying the U.S. is overcounting mortality when in reality the study just adjusted the CDC's numbers so they were comparable to historical reporting in the U.S. and current reporting abroad. To make matters worse, the CDC did not respond to comment until after publication, and it seemed like the CDC responded to NPR's misframed story instead of the actual study. And NPR's story is, how bad is maternal mortality in the U.S.? A new study says it's been overestimated. And the story was updated to include additional comment from the CDC. And I wanted to look at their comment. It says, after publication, a spokesperson for the agency emailed a written statement. CDC disagrees with the findings. The statement reads and goes on to assert that the methods used by the researchers are known to produce a substantial undercount of maternal mortality. The CDC declined to provide anyone for an interview. Now, Alex writes, do these news outlets realize they have a problem with reading studies and statistics and don't know how to fix it, or are they blissfully unaware?
Well, first of all, good on you, Alex Stewart, for diving even deeper than we dove when we talked about this originally. And you see very much in this NPR story the desire to keep the narrative, right? They're going to keep the narrative, whatever the data say. They're going to keep the narrative. They're going to hold on to that thread, and it's confirmation bias is a hell of a drug. It is a hell of a drug.
Next up, we have a note from Katie in Evington, Virginia.
Oh, I know Katie.
And Katie writes, hey, Eliana and Chris, I have a non-news related question, but I need your advice just the same. I'm flying to Japan next week, and I'm wondering if it is rude for me to take my shoes off on the plane if I'm wearing socks. It's a 14-hour and 55-minute flight, and I just can't imagine keeping socks and shoes on for that long. SOS, and thank you in advance. Okay, I think it's fine to take your shoes off, not your socks.
Yeah, and I think when you are on basically an overnight flight of when you're flying for more than half a day, you're going to take your shoes off. I think that's fine, but you must have socks on. And maybe they give you the little slippers. Do they still give you the little slippers?
In business class.
So maybe they'll give you the little slippers that you can put on. And if they don't, maybe you can find a pair of those isotoners that they used to sell, the little slip-on socklet.
I'm looking at these.
And maybe.
Oh my gosh, those are hilarious.
Maybe there's an in-between choice. Maybe you can have a easily packable slipper that you can put on to obviate the question, because you will not just be in your sock feet. You'll have a comfy pair of isotoners slipped on your paws as you fly across the Pacific. And I will further say congratulations on what is. I would love to see Japan. That sounds really cool. And while you're there, please go to a capybara cafe, which I'm obsessed with Japan's weird obsession with weird animals, and I want to see it happen and smuggle something out.
That brings us to our favorite items of the week, where I am forced to say something nice. But Chris, please lead by example.
When able producer Colin Chicola flagged this piece at MSNBC, opinion, why Red Lobster's downfall hits differently for Black communities, by Robin Autry, I was prepared for full facileness. I was prepared for 10,000x facile, that this could be up there for our Facile of the Year award. And I read it, and it's lovely. And it's a lovely, excellent piece in which Robin Autry, so the Darden Restaurant Group that owned Red Lobster, which owns a bunch of stuff, which owns like the Longhorn Steakhouse and the Olive Garden, and so they're the fast casual, the beast of fast casual, and they grew out of Red Lobster. Red Lobster, and I believe it was in Florida, was their first one. And this is a piece about how Red Lobster bucked the trend in the South and would not segregate their restaurants, and that they were welcoming and accessible to Black Americans at a time when that came at a cost in parts of the South. And when they were in Orlando, opening in Orlando in 1968, Orlando was definitely the South. Florida was the South. And now it's coming to be the South again. So congratulations, Florida. You've transited all the way through. But this is a piece of appreciation how Red Lobster played a special role in the Black community. And it's well written. It's lovely and kind of charming, and I'm here for it. And I apologize for jumping to the conclusion of facileness when in reality it was a lovely paean to the now bankrupt Red Lobster.
Chris, my favorite item of the week is a long read, but it is a Free Beacon expose up this morning, so Thursday morning, that has 8 professorial and administrative sources talking about how admissions are working at UCLA Medical School, and how, although racial preferences have been outlawed in California long before the Supreme Court outlawed them, they have persisted in the medical school, particularly since the hiring of a new dean of admissions in 2020, and what the resultant impact on these medical students' standardized test scores have been, and the change in the demographics of the student body, i.e. Precipitous drop in the number of Asian students admitted. And this is a real behind-the-scenes look, I think, at how these things can persist even in the face of a legal ban. And it's really well done.
Cool.
I recommend that for those interested in the subject. That is all the time we have for the news about the news. If you have a story you want us to talk about, email us at wretches@nebulouspodcasts.com and sign up for our newsletter at nebulouspodcasts.com. This has been Ink-Stained Wretches from Nebulous Media, produced by Colin Chicola.
What?
Find us on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. Just search for Wretches.